The classroom fell silent the second the bottle tipped. Thick, purple blackcurrant drink poured over the boy's head, down his face into his eyes, soaking his white shirt, his tie, his open notebook that sat on the desk in front of him. Some students laughed, their voices cutting through the air like broken glass. Some just stared, frozen in that uncomfortable space between shock and relief that it wasn't happening to them. And one boy, the head boy of the school, the so-called king of the corridors, smiled like he had just won a war he had been fighting his entire life. The quiet new student didn't move. He didn't shout. He didn't even look up. His hands stayed flat on the desk, palms down, fingers slightly spread, as if he were trying to hold onto something solid while the world dripped purple around him. What no one in that room knew, not the students whispering behind their hands, not the teachers who would hear about this an hour too late, not even the principal sitting in her office 2 hallways away, was that this moment, this cruel little joke, was about to pull a hidden truth out of the shadows. A truth about the boy's father. A truth that would shake the entire school and change the head boy's life forever. Because the man they thought was just another struggling parent, another quiet face at pickup, another name on an emergency contact form, was something else entirely. And by the end of this story, you may never look at a quiet child or a school bully the same way again. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, who was this quiet boy and why did he refuse to fight back when every instinct in the human body screams to defend yourself, to strike, to run, to do something other than stand there and take it? Why did the head boy, a young man named Daniel Harper, risk his whole reputation, his title, his future, just to humiliate one new student who had barely spoken 10 words since walking through the front doors? And how did the boy's father, a man nobody had noticed, a man who spoke barely a handful of words at parent-teacher conferences, turn the entire story upside down in ways that still echo through the hallways of that school today? Was this just another case of school bullying, another statistic, another story that gets filed away and forgotten? Or was it something much deeper, something that speaks to the very core of how we treat each other, how we raise our children, and what we choose to see when we look at the people around us? Stay with me because the answers aren't simple. They almost never are when human beings are involved, when pride and pain and years of accumulated hurt collide in a single moment that changes everything. This story takes place in a school that could be anywhere in America. A brick building on a quiet street in a suburb that looked exactly like 1,000 other suburbs, with its carefully maintained lawns and its cars lined up in driveways and its sense that nothing truly bad could happen in a place this ordinary. The school had a football field out back where the grass was always a little too long by October. It had hallways lined with lockers that slammed shut between classes, creating a rhythm that became the heartbeat of every student's day. It had a banner in the main hallway that said, "Safe, strong, respectful," in bold letters that had faded slightly from years of fluorescent light. On paper, it was the kind of school parents dreamed of, the kind of school that showed up in real estate listings as a selling point, the kind of school where test scores were high and violence was low and everyone assumed that the biggest problems were homework and hormones. In reality, it had a king. His name was Daniel Harper, but everyone just called him D-King, a nickname he had earned in middle school and worn like a crown ever since. He was head boy, elected by a landslide because no one dared vote against him. He was captain of the soccer team, leading them to 2 consecutive district championships with a combination of genuine skill and the kind of intensity that made other players afraid to disappoint him. He was a straight A student when he felt like it, which was often enough to keep teachers impressed and parents satisfied. Teachers loved him because he knew exactly how to smile at the right moment, how to offer help when they were carrying too many boxes, how to ask about their weekends in a way that felt genuine even when it wasn't. Parents trusted him because he shook hands firmly and looked them in the eye and said, "Yes, sir," and "Yes, ma'am," without being prompted. Students either followed him or feared him, and most did both, orbiting around him like planets around a sun that could warm you or burn you depending on its mood. Because Daniel had learned something dangerous early in life, something that would shape every interaction he had until that purple liquid changed everything. He learned that if adults think you're a hero, they don't see what you do when their backs are turned. They don't see the shove in the empty hallway. They don't see the whispered threat that leaves no evidence. They don't see the way you can destroy someone's lunch or their homework or their sense of safety with a look, a word, a small cruelty that stays small enough to deny. To a lot of kids, Daniel wasn't just a bully. He was the weather. You didn't fight the weather. You didn't argue with it or try to change it or expect it to apologize. You just tried not to stand in the rain. You learned which hallways to avoid and which jokes to laugh at and which days he was in a good mood and which days it was better to be invisible. This was the reality beneath the banner that said, safe, strong, respectful. This was the kingdom that operated in plain sight while adults looked at test scores and attendance records and told themselves that everything was fine. And then there was Jaden Cole, 15 years old, new town, new school, new everything. He arrived in October, which is the worst possible time to be the new kid because all the social structures have already solidified, all the friend groups have already formed, and you're walking into a play where everyone else knows their lines except you. Jaden wasn't the kind of boy who filled a room when he walked in. He was the kind who faded into corners, who found the empty seat in the back, who kept his eyes on the page instead of the crowd. Where other kids blasted music from their phones and filmed videos for social media and shouted across hallways to friends they had just seen 5 minutes ago, Jaden collected secondhand paperbacks from thrift stores and library sales. He had a collection of over 200 books in boxes that he had packed and unpacked more times than he could count. Stories were safer than people. In stories, you could see the villains coming. You could close the book if things got too intense. You could always start over from the beginning if you didn't like how things were going. His father, Michael, knew why his son was this way. He knew because he had watched it happen year by year, withdrawal by withdrawal, ever since the world had gotten too loud and too cruel and too unpredictable for a sensitive boy who just wanted to be left alone. Jaden's mother had left when he was 9. The divorce had been loud and bitter and long, stretching over 2 years of arguments that echoed through thin apartment walls, of lawyers sending letters that felt like weapons, of a custody battle that left everyone wounded. Michael got full custody in the end, but by then the damage was done. Jaden had learned that the people who were supposed to protect you could hurt you the most. He had learned that love wasn't always safe. He had learned that the best way to survive was to need no one, expect nothing, and keep your heart behind walls high enough that nothing could climb over them. Since then, father and son moved like two quiet planets circling each other, close but careful, connected by gravity but maintaining their separate orbits. They ate dinner together most nights, but conversation was sparse. They watched movies on weekends but sat on opposite ends of the couch. They loved each other deeply, but neither of them quite knew how to say it out loud anymore. The night before Jaden's first day at the new school, Michael found him in his room, carefully placing books into his backpack even though he knew he wouldn't be reading them in class. It was a comfort thing, Michael understood. Like a child with a stuffed animal, except Jaden's stuffed animals had spines and pages and worlds inside them where he could escape when the real world became too much. Michael leaned against the doorframe, coffee cup in hand, watching his son with the kind of quiet attention that had become their primary language. "You packed your books?" Michael asked, though the answer was obvious. "Yeah," Jaden replied, not looking up. "Remember what I always say?" A small smile crossed Jaden's face, the first one Michael had seen in days. "Head down. Breathe. Choose your battles. And never let someone else tell you who you are." Michael nodded, satisfied. These were the rules he had given his son for surviving in a world that didn't always make space for quiet boys with big hearts. Head down meant don't attract attention, don't make yourself a target, don't give bullies a reason to notice you. Breathe meant stay calm, don't let your emotions make your decisions, don't react in ways you'll regret. Choose your battles meant know the difference between a fight worth having and a fight you'll lose, between standing your ground and walking away to fight another day. And never let someone else tell you who you are meant that no matter what names they call you, no matter what stories they tell about you, no matter how hard they try to make you small, you know your own worth and you hold on to it like a lifeline. What Jaden didn't know, what Michael had never fully explained, was where those rules came from. In the corner of Michael's closet, behind winter coats and boxes of tax documents, hung a collection of old uniforms and certificates and photographs that told a story Michael rarely spoke about. There were martial arts uniforms from 3 different disciplines, worn soft with years of training. There were photographs of him younger, standing with police officers after teaching them defensive tactics, standing with soldiers after running them through crisis response scenarios, standing with groups of ordinary people who had signed up for his self-defense courses because they were tired of being afraid. For over 20 years, Michael Cole had lived a very different life. He had been a trainer, an instructor, a man who taught other men and women how to survive the worst moments of their lives. He taught them how to fight, yes, but more importantly, he taught them how not to fight, how to de-escalate, how to control their fear, how to end confrontations with as little damage as possible. He had worked with law enforcement agencies, with military units, with private security firms, with domestic violence shelters, with anyone who needed to learn that real strength wasn't about hurting people but about protecting them. But that was another story, one he didn't tell very often, one that belonged to a version of himself that had existed before the divorce, before the custody battle, before he had scaled his entire life down to fit inside a small apartment with a son who needed him to be present more than powerful. To Jaden he was just dad. Quiet, strict, always watching. A man who worked from home doing consulting that Jaden never asked about. A man who could fix anything around the house but sometimes forgot to buy groceries. A man who said I love you with actions instead of words, with packed lunches and early pickups and the way he always waited up no matter how late Jaden came home. And that was enough. Or so Jaden thought. On his first day at Ridgeview High, Jaden did what his father taught him. He walked steady through the front doors, his pace neither too fast nor too slow, his eyes forward but not challenging, his posture straight but not stiff. He breathed slow and deep, counting to 4 on the inhale and 4 on the exhale, the way his father had taught him when he was younger and the panic attacks came at night. He tried to blend into the background, to become just another face in the crowd, just another body in the hallway, just another student who wasn't worth noticing. And for most of the morning it worked. He found his classes, took notes, answered questions when teachers called on him, and avoided eye contact with anyone who seemed like trouble. He ate his lunch outside, behind the science building, where no one went because the dumpsters were nearby and the smell kept everyone away. He survived. That was the goal for the first day. Just survive. But survival has a way of becoming harder when someone decides you're worth hunting. The next day Jaden made a mistake. He got hungry at lunch and decided to eat in the cafeteria like a normal student. He told himself it would be fine, that he was being paranoid, that not every school was as bad as the last one, where he had spent an entire semester eating in bathroom stalls to avoid the boys who had decided he was their favorite target. He picked up a tray, waited in line, collected the kind of food that all school cafeterias serve, the kind that tastes like nothing and fills you up anyway. He looked for a seat, scanning the room the way his father had taught him to scan a room, noting exits and obstacles and the general layout of where people were positioned. Every school cafeteria has its own unspoken map, its own social geography that determines who sits where and who gets ignored and who everyone watches. The popular kids claimed the tables by the windows, where the light was best and everyone could see them being fabulous. The athletes clustered near the door, where they could make a quick exit to the gym. The theater kids took the table in the corner, where they could be dramatic without anyone caring. The quiet kids, the invisible kids, the kids who hadn't found their tribe yet, scattered around the edges, filling in the gaps, hoping to avoid notice. And in the center, at the table that seemed to radiate importance, sat Daniel Harper and his crew. Jaden saw them and immediately adjusted his path, steering toward an empty table on the far side of the room, as far from that center of gravity as possible. But Daniel had already seen him. That was Daniel's gift, if you could call it that. He noticed weakness the way a shark notices blood in the water, automatically, instinctively, without even trying. Something about Jaden's posture, about the way he clutched his tray too tightly, about the way his eyes darted around the room looking for safety, triggered something in Daniel's brain. Quiet. Alone. Out of place. No. To Daniel, boys like that weren't just new students. They were opportunities. They were chances to remind everyone who was in charge. They were canvases on which he could paint his dominance. His friends noticed where his attention had gone and followed his gaze like loyal dogs tracking a scent. Yo. New kid. You lost. Daniel's voice carried across the cafeteria, not shouting but loud enough that the tables around him could hear. Conversations paused. Heads turned. The social machinery of high school began to grind in Jaden's direction. Look at that shirt, man. Did Goodwill have a sale? This from one of Daniel's friends, a boy whose name Jaden would never learn but whose laughter would echo in his memory for years. Book 2. We got ourselves a little professor. Another friend, piling on, sensing that they were in the opening moments of entertainment and wanting to contribute. Jaden kept walking, eyes on his tray, following his father's rules even though every instinct screamed at him to run or fight or disappear. Head down. Breathe. Choose your battles. This wasn't a battle worth having. This was a moment to survive. Hey, I'm talking to you. Where's your manners, bookworm? Daniel's voice had sharpened now, the playful edge giving way to something harder, something that demanded a response. Jaden reached the empty table and sat down, placing his tray carefully, keeping his eyes on his food. He didn't respond. He didn't look up. He focused on breathing, on staying calm, on not giving them anything to work with. Around him, the cafeteria held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. For a moment, it seemed like Daniel might let it go. He had made his point. He had established that the new kid was beneath him, unworthy of even a response. He could return to his lunch and his friends and let the natural order of things continue undisturbed. But something about Jaden's silence bothered him. Something about the way the new kid didn't flinch, didn't apologize, didn't give him the satisfaction of visible fear. It felt like disrespect, even though it was the opposite. Daniel stood up. The movement rippled outward through the cafeteria like a stone dropped in still water. Students who had been pretending not to watch now openly stared. Phones appeared in hands, screens angled toward the scene that everyone knew was about to unfold. Daniel grabbed a bottle from his tray, a deep purple blackcurrant drink, the kind that stains fabric and skin and anything else it touches. He walked toward Jaden's table with the slow, deliberate pace of someone who knows the whole world is watching and wants to give them a good show. His friends followed, forming a loose semicircle that blocked any easy escape. Jaden heard them coming. He felt the air change around him, felt the weight of attention pressing down on his shoulders. His father's voice echoed in his mind, "There are moments you fight, Jay, and moments you endure. Choose carefully." This, Jaden decided, was a moment to endure. Fighting back would make things worse. Running would make him look weak. The only option was to sit still and let it happen and hope that it would end quickly. "Since you're too good to say hello," Daniel said, standing directly behind Jaden now, "let's give you a proper welcome." He uncapped the bottle. For a moment, the cafeteria was a held breath. Then the liquid fell. Purple blackcurrant drink poured over Jaden's head like a baptism into suffering. It ran down his face, into his eyes, into his mouth when he gasped in shock. It soaked his white collar and spread across his shoulders, turning his shirt into a canvas of humiliation. It dripped onto his notebook, blurring the notes he had taken that morning, erasing the words he had carefully written. It pooled on the table and ran onto the floor, creating a sticky purple mess that someone else would have to clean up. Laughter erupted from one corner of the cafeteria, the sharp, cruel kind that feeds on someone else's pain. Gasps came from another corner, from students who hadn't expected it to go this far, who were uncomfortable but not brave enough to say anything. One girl covered her mouth with her hand, eyes full of pity and guilt and relief that she hadn't been the target. Phones recorded everything, capturing the moment from multiple angles, preserving it for later circulation, for group chats and social media and the endless digital archive of adolescent cruelty. Jaden sat very still. The liquid dripped from his chin. His eyes stung from the sugar and the acid. His hands stayed flat on the table, pressing against the surface, trembling slightly but holding steady. He didn't shout. He didn't swing. He didn't beg or cry or give them any of the reactions they wanted. He closed his eyes and remembered a voice from years ago, from a time when his father still seemed like the strongest person in the world. "There are moments you fight, Jay, and moments you endure. Choose carefully." This was a moment to endure. So he endured. He stood up slowly, purple drink running down his arms and dripping from his fingertips. He picked up his ruined notebook and his backpack. He didn't look at Daniel. He didn't look at anyone. He walked out of the cafeteria with as much dignity as a 15-year-old can muster when his entire body is covered in sticky purple liquid and 200 students are watching him become a meme. As he passed through the door, he didn't notice the security camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling. He didn't know that someone else was already watching. But someone was. And that changed everything. How would you feel if this happened to you? If you walked into a new school just trying to survive, just trying to make it through the day, and someone decided that your mere existence was an invitation for humiliation? Would you fight back? Would you run? Would you endure the way Jaden did, or would something inside you snap? Let us know in the comments what you think you would do. We want to hear your thoughts on this story as it unfolds. The school tried to handle it by the book. That's what schools always do when something happens that might generate complaints or lawsuits or bad publicity. They pull out the handbook. They follow the procedures. They fill out the forms and schedule the meetings and say all the right words about taking things seriously and investigating thoroughly and ensuring that this never happens again. The principal, a woman named Margaret Turner who had been running Ridgeview High for 12 years, called Jaden's father the same afternoon. She used words like incident and inappropriate behavior and zero tolerance policy, words that sounded strong but meant nothing when translated into action. She offered to meet with the family and discuss options. She mentioned counseling services and schedule adjustments and the possibility of disciplinary action for the students involved. Michael Cole listened to all of this with the phone pressed against his ear and his jaw set in a line that would have worried anyone who knew what it meant. He thanked her for calling. He agreed to come in the next morning. He hung up the phone and stood in his kitchen for a long moment, looking at the wall without seeing it, breathing the way he had taught thousands of people to breathe when they needed to stay calm in the middle of a crisis. Then he went to find his son. Jaden was in the bathroom, scrubbing purple stains from his arms with a washcloth, his ruined shirt in a heap on the floor. His eyes were dry, but there was something broken in his posture, a slump in his shoulders that hadn't been there that morning. Michael stood in the doorway and watched and felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't anger exactly. It was older than that, deeper than that. It was the feeling he used to get before entering a dangerous situation, the heightened awareness, the clarity of purpose, the sense that everything unnecessary was falling away and only what mattered remained. "Tell me what happened," he said quietly. Jaden told him. All of it. The words in the cafeteria. The bottle. The laughter. The walk of shame through the door while everyone watched. He told it without crying, without asking for sympathy, just laying out the facts the way he imagined his father would want them laid out. When he finished, Michael nodded once. "Okay," he said. "We'll handle this." "How?" Jaden asked, and there was something in his voice, some mixture of hope and doubt that cut Michael deeper than any words could have. "Trust me," Michael said. And for the first time in a long time, Jaden did. The next morning, Michael sat in Principal Turner's office while she showed him a form and explained the school's bullying policy and assured him that Daniel Harper had already been spoken to and understood the seriousness of his actions. Behind her desk, a monitor showed the feed from various security cameras around the school. Michael watched it while she talked, not really listening to her words, watching students move through hallways and cluster in groups and enact the small dramas of their daily lives. "Can I see the footage?" he asked, interrupting her mid-sentence. She paused, surprised. "Excuse me?" "From the cafeteria cameras. The incident yesterday. I prefer to react to what happened, not to what people say happened." It was a reasonable request, and Principal Turner wasn't in a position to refuse a concerned parent who had every right to know exactly what had been done to his child. She pulled up the file on her computer and turned the monitor so Michael could see. The footage was grainy the way security footage always is, but clear enough. Clear enough to see Daniel approach with the bottle. Clear enough to see the liquid pour. Clear enough to see Jaden sit there, unmoving, while the world turned purple around him. Clear enough to see the laughter and the phones and the complete absence of any adult intervention. Michael watched it twice. His face remained calm, but his hand, resting on his knee, curled into a fist and then slowly uncurled. "We've spoken to Daniel," Principal Turner said, filling the silence. "He understands this was unacceptable. He'll apologize. There may be a suspension." "And when he comes back?" Michael asked. "We will continue to monitor the situation." There was that word. Monitor. Michael knew that word from 1,000 meetings and briefings and after-action reports. It meant wait and see. It meant hope for the best. It meant we've done what we can on paper and now we're crossing our fingers that nothing else happens. In his experience, waiting and seeing rarely stopped the next blow. It just meant the next blow happened when no one was watching. The drive home was quiet, the kind of silence that fills a car when both people inside have too much to say and no idea how to start. Jaden stared out the window, watching houses and trees and stop signs pass by, feeling the weight of his father's attention even though Michael kept his eyes on the road. Finally, Michael spoke. "Why didn't you hit him back?" The question wasn't accusatory. It was curious, maybe even a little sad. Jaden took a long time to answer. "You told me not to start fights." "I said don't start them. I didn't say stand there and drown." "If I swing," Jaden said slowly, "I'm the angry black kid. The violent one. The one they were right to be afraid of. If I walk away, I'm a coward. The weak one. The one who deserved what he got." He turned to look at his father, and there was something ancient in his eyes, some understanding that no 15-year-old should have to carry. "Which one you want me to be, Dad?" Michael didn't answer. For the first time in a long time, he didn't have an immediate answer. This wasn't a battlefield with clear enemies and clear rules of engagement. This was high school. Rumors and politics. Phones filming everything. Social media turning every moment into a permanent record. The wrong move could follow Jaden for years, could show up in college applications and job interviews and first dates, could become the first thing people found when they searched his name. Violence had consequences that went far beyond the immediate pain. But so did passivity. So did being seen as someone who wouldn't defend himself. So did carrying the weight of humiliation without ever getting to put it down. Michael gripped the steering wheel a little tighter and made a decision. Not to strike back. Not yet. Not in the way his training had prepared him for. But to step into Jaden's world. To bring his past with him. To show his son and everyone else at that school what real strength looked like. The next day, Michael arrived at Ridgeview High wearing a visitor's badge and a calm expression that gave nothing away. Principal Turner walked beside him, explaining the school's programs and achievements, showing off the building the way you show off a house you're trying to sell. She had invited him to speak to students about resilience and self-discipline, partly because she wanted to show Jaden's father that the school cared, partly because she sensed that this quiet man might have something worth hearing. She had no idea who she had invited. As they walked the halls, Michael saw everything. His training hadn't left him even after years of quiet life. He saw the shove that lasted a second too long between two boys near the lockers, the kind of shove that could have been playful but wasn't. He saw a teacher looking away when a girl's books were knocked from her hands, too tired or too overwhelmed to get involved. He saw a younger student shrinking against the wall as someone snapped a picture of her eating alone, capturing her loneliness for later mockery. And he saw, leaning against one bank of lockers with his friends arranged around him like a royal court, the head boy, Daniel Harper. The boy who had poured purple humiliation over his son's head. The boy who wore a smirk like a crown. The boy who had no idea what was coming. Daniel spotted them as they approached, Michael and Principal Turner walking side by side. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he leaned toward his friends to whisper something that made them snicker. "Check it out, guys. Grandpa's here to complain. Think he knows who runs this place? If he doesn't now, he will." Michael heard none of this, but he didn't need to. He could read the body language from 20 feet away, the way Daniel straightened up when he saw them coming, the way he positioned himself to look casual and unbothered, the way his friends oriented themselves around him for backup. All the classic signs of a young man who had built his identity around dominance and was suddenly unsure if his kingdom was being invaded. As Michael passed the group, he paused for just a heartbeat. Not long enough to be confrontational. Not long enough for Principal Turner to notice. Just long enough for his eyes to meet Daniel's. There was nothing threatening in Michael's expression. No anger. No challenge. Just calm awareness. The look of someone who sees exactly what you are and isn't impressed. Daniel looked away first. He didn't know why. Something in that gaze made him uncomfortable in a way he couldn't name. He covered it with a laugh and another whispered comment to his friends, but the laugh sounded hollow even to his own ears, and the comment died in his throat before he could finish it. Michael kept walking. He hadn't said a word. He hadn't needed to. Sometimes the most dangerous people in a room are the ones who say the least. And Daniel, for the first time in a long time, felt the unfamiliar chill of being seen by someone he couldn't control. That afternoon, the school gathered in the auditorium for what they expected to be another boring assembly. Students slumped in their seats, phones hidden in laps, mentally counting the minutes until they could escape back to their regular lives. Teachers lined the walls, some genuinely interested, most just grateful for a break from classroom management. Principal Turner gave a brief introduction, using words like honored guest and valuable life experience and important messages about character, the kind of words that made students tune out before the speaker even reached the microphone. Then Michael Cole stepped onto the stage. He wasn't physically imposing. Average height. Lean build. The kind of man you might pass on the street without noticing. But something about the way he moved drew attention. There was no wasted motion. No nervous gestures. No fidgeting with notes or adjusting the microphone or doing any of the things speakers usually do when they're uncomfortable being watched. He simply stood there, let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable, and then began to speak. When I was 25 years old, I watched a man pick the wrong fight. His voice was quiet, but it carried. Something about the tone, the certainty behind it, made students lift their heads from their phones. He thought he was strong because people were afraid of him. He thought fear was the same as respect. He thought that because he could hurt people, he was powerful. Pause. Long enough for the words to settle. He didn't know what real strength looked like until it was too late. Michael let his gaze travel across the auditorium, not looking at any student in particular, not looking at Daniel, but somehow making everyone feel seen. For years I trained soldiers, police officers, security teams, people whose jobs required them to face violence. I taught them how to control a dangerous situation with as little harm as possible. Not because I liked fighting. Not because I was good at hurting people. But because I had seen what happened when nobody knew how to stop it. He shifted slightly, his posture changing in a subtle way that somehow made him seem larger. I've seen people die because someone got angry and didn't know how to stop. I've seen families destroyed because someone wanted to prove they were tough. I've seen young men with everything ahead of them throw it all away for 5 seconds of feeling powerful. Cut to Daniel sitting in the middle section, arms crossed, face tight. He wasn't smirking anymore. He wasn't whispering to his friends. He was listening, despite himself, feeling every word like a stone thrown at glass. You can tell a lot about a person by how they treat someone who can't fight back. Or who won't fight back. Those are different things, by the way. Can't and won't. One is weakness. The other might be the strongest thing a person can do. Michael paused again, and when he continued, his voice was softer. There are people in this room right now who think hurting someone weaker makes them powerful. I'm here to tell you, as someone who has seen real violence, it just makes you small. It makes you exactly the kind of person that people like me were trained to stop. The auditorium was silent. Not the restless silence of boredom, but the heavy silence of students actually thinking. Some stared at their shoes, suddenly uncomfortable with memories of things they had done or watched others do. Some shifted uneasily, wondering if the stranger somehow knew their secrets. Some felt a flicker of hope, a possibility that someone actually understood what they went through every day. And one boy in the middle row, arms crossed, face hardened, felt something crack inside him that he didn't know how to name. Michael never said Daniel's name. He didn't talk about the blackcurrant incident. He didn't point fingers or assign blame or turn his speech into an accusation. He didn't have to. Everyone in that room knew exactly what he was talking about. And somehow, that made it more powerful than any direct confrontation could have been. For a day or two after the assembly, the school felt different. Quieter. Careful. Students who had laughed at the cafeteria incident suddenly found other things to talk about. Teachers seemed more alert, more present, more willing to intervene in the small cruelties that usually passed unnoticed. The video of Jaden getting drenched started disappearing from social media accounts, deleted by students who suddenly didn't want to be associated with it. There was a sense that something had shifted, that the rules of the game had changed in ways nobody quite understood yet. But change doesn't come that easily. Not in high school. Not in life. To someone like Daniel Harper, Michael's speech wasn't a warning. It was a challenge. Daniel had built his entire identity around being untouchable. Around being the one who decided who got hurt and who got protected. Around being the king of a kingdom he had conquered through years of careful manipulation and strategic cruelty. He couldn't let some old man walk into his school and take that away from him. He couldn't let the quiet new kid become a symbol of something Daniel couldn't control. He needed to prove to everyone and to himself that nothing had changed. That he was still in charge. That fear was still the currency of his realm. Bullies rarely retire quietly. They don't hear a speech and suddenly transform into good people. They don't see the error of their ways and apologize and become advocates for kindness. They go bigger, louder, riskier. They double down on the only strategy they know, the only identity they've built, even when everything inside them is screaming that they're making a mistake. The next week at lunch, Daniel made his move. Same cafeteria. Same tables. Same social geography that determined who mattered and who didn't. Jaden walked in with his tray, head a little higher than before, not proud exactly but not defeated either. Something about his father's speech had given him a quiet confidence that showed in his posture. He didn't expect to be left alone forever. He knew Daniel too well for that. But he also knew for the first time that he wasn't as alone as he had thought. His father had seen him, had defended him, had shown the whole school that the quiet new kid had someone in his corner. That meant something. Even if it changed nothing, it meant something. Daniel watched him cross the cafeteria, tracking his movement the way he always tracked potential targets. Another bottle sat on his tray, purple and full and ready. His friends gathered around him, sensing that something was about to happen, excited by the prospect of a sequel to their earlier entertainment. "Round 2, bookworm," Daniel said as he approached Jaden's table, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Let's see if Daddy's watching this time." He stood behind Jaden, bottle raised, smile fixed in place. The cafeteria held its breath the way it had before, phones appearing in hands, students frozen between watching and looking away. Jaden felt the shadow fall across his table. Felt the familiar panic start to rise in his chest. Heard his father's voice in his memory, "There are moments you fight, Jay, and moments you endure." But this time he didn't have to choose. Because this time someone was watching. That's enough. The voice came from behind Daniel, calm and quiet and somehow cutting through the cafeteria noise like a blade through water. Michael Cole stood there, having entered through the side door, visiting the school for a follow-up meeting with Principal Turner that had ended early. His timing wasn't planned. It was just luck or fate or whatever word you use for the moments when the universe decides to intervene. His hand appeared, steady and sure, gripping Daniel's wrist before the first drop could fall. Daniel's eyes went wide. He tried to yank his arm free, but the grip held him like iron. "Take your hand off me, old man." His voice was loud, aggressive, plain to the crowd that was watching. Careful, Michael said, his voice still quiet. You don't want to do this. Something in those words, something in the calm certainty behind them, should have warned Daniel. Should have made him reconsider. Should have triggered some survival instinct that told him this was not a fight he wanted. But pride has a way of making us stupid. Daniel yanked his arm free with a violent jerk and shoved Michael's shoulder with an open palm. Not hard enough to knock him down, but hard enough to be clearly aggressive. An attack. To the students watching, it looked like a push. Just an angry teenager pushing an adult who had grabbed him. Reasonable, maybe. Justifiable, some might say. To Michael, it was a telegraphed attack. The kind of sloppy, emotional movement he had spent 20 years teaching people to counter. His body moved before his mind even caught up. It wasn't violence. It wasn't aggression. It was control. Pure, practiced, precise control. In a single smooth motion, Michael pivoted, redirecting Daniel's momentum, using the force of the shove against itself. Daniel stumbled forward, off balance, and Michael guided him down with a subtle wrist lock that put exactly enough pressure on the joint to bring Daniel to his knees without causing any injury. The bottle clattered to the floor and rolled away, purple liquid spilling across the linoleum in a spreading stain that no one paid attention to. The cafeteria went silent. Someone's phone hit a table and stopped recording in shock. For the first time in his kingdom, the king found the ground rising to meet him. Daniel struggled against the hold, more from embarrassment than pain. Let me go. His voice cracked, losing the commanding tone he usually wore like armor. I am, Michael said calmly. Right now, I'm letting you walk away from a very bad decision. He released the wrist lock gently and stepped back, giving Daniel space to stand, making it clear that this wasn't about dominance or humiliation. Daniel scrambled to his feet, face red, breathing hard, looking around at the students who were staring at him with expressions he had never seen before. Not fear. Not respect. Something else. Something that looked uncomfortably like pity. Michael addressed the room, his voice carrying without shouting. I spent 20 years training people how not to hurt each other. I taught them how to end violence quickly, safely, with as little damage as possible. Some of them are soldiers. Some are police officers. Some are just parents who didn't want to be afraid anymore. I never imagined I'd need those skills in a school cafeteria. Murmurs spread through the watching students. He trained the police? No way. Did you see how fast that was? Who is this guy? The story flipped in that moment. The quiet boy wasn't just the new kid. He was the son of a man whose entire life had been built around protecting others from exactly this kind of cruelty. The context changed everything. Michael turned to Daniel, who was standing now, shoulders hunched, all the swagger drained out of him like air from a punctured balloon. Daniel, is it? Michael waited for a response that didn't come. You have something rare here. People listen when you speak. They follow you when you move. That is a gift. And you're using it to pour juice on kids who won't fight back. He paused, letting the words land. I've seen men twice your size cry for their mothers when they realized what their choices cost them. You're still young. You can decide what kind of man you're going to be right now in front of everyone. He turned to address the watching students. If you filmed any of this, I can't stop you from posting it. But think about what you're recording. Are you documenting cruelty, or the moment it stopped? In the silence that followed, Jaden stood up. His shirt was clean this time, new, no purple stains. But everyone remembered what had happened before. Everyone knew the context. I don't want him expelled, Jaden said, his voice quiet but clear. I just want it to stop. The words hung in the air like a held breath. Around the cafeteria, students exchanged glances. Some nodded slowly. Some looked at Daniel with expressions that were starting to shift from fear to something else. Something like the beginning of understanding. And in that silence, something shifted. Not just around Daniel. Inside him. What do you think happened in that moment? Do you think people like Daniel can truly change? Or do you think the patterns we establish when we're young follow us forever, shaping who we become no matter how hard we try to be different? Let us know in the comments. This is a conversation worth having, and your perspective matters. We want to hear what you would have done in Jaden's position, in Michael's position, even in Daniel's position. Because the truth is, most of us have been all three at different points in our lives. Most of us have been the victim, the bystander, and yes, sometimes the bully, even if we don't like to admit it. There were consequences, of course. There always are. The school board held emergency meetings. Parents called demanding explanations and assurances. Local news got wind of the story and ran a segment about conflict resolution in schools that carefully avoided naming anyone involved. Daniel lost his title as head boy. He faced suspension. He was required to attend mandatory counseling sessions with a therapist who specialized in adolescent behavioral issues. His parents, who had always believed their son was incapable of this kind of cruelty, were forced to confront uncomfortable truths about who he had become when they weren't watching. Principal Turner implemented new policies about monitoring the cafeteria and hallways. Teachers received training on identifying bullying behaviors. The school hired an additional counselor specifically to handle reports of harassment and intimidation. All the things that should have been done years ago, finally done because someone had forced the issue into the light where it couldn't be ignored. But something else happened too. Something that wasn't in any policy manual or administrative procedure. A few weeks after the incident, a new sign appeared in the hallway near the gymnasium. Student Safety and Confidence Program. Led by Michael Cole. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 3:30 p.m. All students welcome. Started with 3 kids. Quiet kids. The kind who ate lunch alone and kept their heads down in hallways and flinched when someone moved too quickly nearby. They showed up to the first session nervous and uncertain, not sure what to expect, half convinced it was some kind of trap. Michael taught them how to stand, how to breathe, how to be aware of their surroundings without being paranoid, how to project confidence even when they didn't feel it, how to de-escalate confrontations with words before they became physical, how to protect themselves if words failed, not how to fight, how to survive. The difference matters. By the second week, there were 6 students. By the third week, a dozen. Word spread through the underground channels that teenagers use to share information adults don't hear about. The program was different. The man who ran it was different. He didn't lecture or condescend or pretend to understand what they were going through. He taught them skills. Practical skills. The kind of knowledge that could actually make a difference in the hallways and parking lots and bus stops where adults never saw what really happened. Jaden assisted his father, holding pads for practice strikes, demonstrating breathing exercises, showing newer students the basics while Michael worked with those who were ready for more advanced techniques. For the first time since the divorce, father and son had something they did together. Something that connected them beyond the careful orbit of quiet coexistence. They talked during the drives to and from school. About technique at first. Then about other things. About Jaden's mother and why the marriage fell apart. About Michael's years of training soldiers and cops and ordinary people. About fear and courage and what it actually means to be strong in a world that often rewards the wrong kind of strength. They still weren't perfect. They still had silences that stretched too long and conversations that ended awkwardly. But they were trying. And sometimes trying is enough. On the third week of the program, another student walked through the gym doors. No entourage. No swagger. No smirk. Just a boy who looked smaller than he used to, humbled by weeks of consequences and counseling and the uncomfortable experience of seeing himself through other people's eyes. Daniel Harper. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, clearly uncertain, clearly expecting to be turned away. Michael looked at him across the gym, face unreadable. Jaden, standing nearby, tensed slightly. The other students, most of whom had been Daniel's targets at one point or another, went still with wariness. "I want to learn," Daniel said. His voice was different than it used to be. Quieter. Less certain. "I want to understand how you did what you did in the cafeteria. I want to know what real strength looks like." Michael studied him for what felt like a very long time. Long enough for Daniel to start shifting uncomfortably under the scrutiny. Long enough for the other students to exchange uncertain glances. Long enough for Jaden to wonder what his father would do. Then Michael nodded once, walked to the equipment rack and pulled out a pair of practice gloves. "Start with these," he said, handing them over. "We begin with basics. Everyone begins with basics." Daniel took the gloves like they were made of glass. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet," Michael replied. "Thank me when you've earned it." Change didn't come overnight. It rarely does. Daniel still had his temper, still struggled with the impulses that had made him who he used to be, still fought against years of learned behavior that told him dominance was the only way to matter. Jaden still preferred the company of books, still faded into corners when rooms got too crowded, still carried the scars of everything that had happened before the purple drink and everything that came after. The school still had its dramas, its whispers, its bad days when old patterns reasserted themselves and everything felt hopeless. But slowly, over weeks and months that stretched into the rest of that school year and beyond, something in the air shifted. Students started stepping in instead of looking away when they saw someone being targeted. Teachers listened harder, acted faster, took complaints more seriously. The video of Jaden getting drenched, which had seemed so permanent in the digital world, faded into obscurity, replaced by newer stories and newer concerns and the relentless forward motion of teenage life. And the boy who had once poured blackcurrant over another student's head started using his voice for something else. It happened gradually, almost imperceptibly. Daniel spoke up when he heard someone planning to target a younger student, using his residual social influence to shut it down before it started. He stepped between two boys about to fight, talking them down with words instead of fists, remembering what Michael had taught about de-escalation. He started sitting with different people at lunch, not his old crew but the students on the margins, the ones he would have ignored or tormented before. He wasn't perfect. He still made mistakes. He still lost his temper sometimes and said things he regretted and had to apologize and start over. But he was trying. And sometimes, maybe most times, trying is enough. Years later, if you walked into Ridgeview High, you might never guess what happened in that cafeteria. No plaque commemorates the day a father stepped in to protect his son. No banner mentions the moment a bully became something else. Just a building full of ordinary stories, ordinary dramas, ordinary teenagers navigating the impossible complexity of growing up. The sign for the Safety and Confidence program still hangs near the gym, though different people run it now. Michael Cole moved on eventually, taking consulting work in another state, but his methods stayed behind, passed down through students who became teachers who became mentors themselves. Jaden graduated near the top of his class and went to college to study psychology, wanting to understand why people hurt each other and how they can heal. Daniel Harper graduated too, with a record that included both his suspension and a community service award he earned through volunteer work with younger students. They weren't friends exactly. Too much had happened for simple friendship. But they respected each other, in the careful way that people respect someone they've seen at their worst and their best. Here is what I want you to think about as this story ends. If you had been in that cafeteria on the day the bottle tipped, what would you have done? Would you have laughed, caught up in the social pressure to be part of the crowd, to avoid becoming a target yourself? Would you have looked away, telling yourself it wasn't your business, that getting involved would only make things worse? Would you have filmed it, preserving the cruelty for later entertainment, not thinking about the human being underneath the purple stain? Or would you have stepped in, risking your own social standing, your own safety, your own comfort, to stand between a bully and his target? Be honest with yourself. Most of us want to believe we'd be heroes, but the research shows that most of us aren't. Most of us are bystanders, frozen by the same fear that kept everyone in that cafeteria silent while a boy drowned in humiliation. That's not a judgment. It's just reality. We're social creatures, wired to fit in, to avoid conflict, to follow the lead of whoever seems to be in charge. But here's what the research also shows. It only takes one person, one voice, one step forward, one refusal to participate in cruelty. One moment of courage can break the spell, can give permission to everyone else who wanted to act but was afraid to be first. Michael Cole was that person in this story. But he shouldn't have had to be. There should have been someone in that cafeteria, student or teacher, willing to step forward before a father had to drive across town and risk everything to protect his son. That person could be you next time. Wherever you are, whatever school or workplace or community you're part of, there will be a next time. There's always a next time. Someone will be targeted. Someone will be humiliated. Someone will stand alone while the crowd watches or laughs or pretends not to see. And in that moment, you'll have a choice. The same choice everyone in that cafeteria had. The same choice we all have every day in 1,000 small ways that add up to who we are. I'm not going to tell you what choice to make. That's not my place. But I want you to know that the choice exists. That silence is a choice too. That looking away is a choice. That not my problem is a choice. And that every choice has consequences not just for the person being hurt, but for you, for who you're becoming, for the kind of world you're helping to create. Do you believe people like Daniel can truly change? Let us know in the comments. Do you think the patterns we establish when we're young define us forever? Or do you think redemption is always possible for those willing to do the work? And if this story touched you, if it made you think about your own experiences or your own choices, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with the quiet kid in your class who feels invisible. Share it with the parent who's worried about their child. Share it with the person who used to be a bully and hasn't figured out how to be someone else yet. Because stories like this aren't just entertainment. They're mirrors. They show us who we are and who we could be. They remind us that every person, no matter how quiet or how cruel, has a story we don't know. And they challenge us to be better, to do better, to choose differently than we chose before. Thanks for watching until the end. If you made it this far, you're part of a special group. The people who don't just scroll past, who actually engage with stories that matter, who take the time to think about what they've seen. Subscribe if you haven't already. There are more stories coming, stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. And until next time, remember, quiet doesn't mean weak. And sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one who chooses not to throw the first punch.